Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly back into a time when sleep wasn't just something you did at night. It was a whole routine, a culture, and frankly a bit of a mess. You're lying on a straw mattress that smells faintly of moldy hay and last week's dinner. Your woolen blanket is scratchy and uncooperative. Outside, a wooden shutter creaks in the breeze. A dog howls in the distance, or maybe it's someone's stomach. This is boring history for sleep, but don't get too comfy just yet. Tonight's topic might leave you wondering if you've been doing bedtime wrong your whole life. Welcome to the weird world of segmented sleep, a habit that once ruled the medieval night like it was the only way to dream properly. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and the local time. It's always fun to see who's drifting off where. Back to your mattress. You've just drifted off to sleep after muttering a quick evening prayer. The room is dark. Well, as dark as it gets in a world without LED clocks and blackout curtains. A single tallow candle sputters low on the wall. You curl your knees, wrapped like a burrito in a thin linen shift, and drift off. But here's the kicker. You're not planning to sleep through the night. Nobody in your village does. Your body's internal clock, shaped more by tradition than melatonin, is set to wake you up after a few hours. This isn't insomnia. It's your first sleep. People in medieval Europe commonly slept in two distinct shifts, with a wakeful period in between. The first sleep might last from around sunset to midnight, followed by an hour or two of quiet wakefulness known as the watch. Then comes second sleep, from the early morning hours until dawn. Sounds inefficient? Not really. That middle-of-the-night intermission was often a productive or intimate time. You stretch, yawn, and sit up. Your eyes adjust to the flickering glow of the hearth. Maybe you stoke the fire. Maybe you mumble a few psalms or check for lice. Or maybe you sneak out for a late-night tryst with the baker's apprentice. Don't judge. Everyone's up. Some scholars believe this segmented slumber allowed for deeper REM cycles and a more natural alignment with circadian rhythms. Others argue it was just a product of limited artificial light and long, boring winter nights. The truth is still up for debate. What we do know is that this strange routine was widely recorded. From English peasants to French aristocrats, they all nodded off in 2 acts. And it wasn't just about getting up to pee. The time between sleeps was used for everything from prayer and sex to crafting, reading, or even gossip. Picture a family sitting in semi-darkness, half asleep, spinning wool or whispering about the neighbor's sick goat. Sleepy drama at its finest. In fact, early church sermons often referred to these intervals as opportunities for spiritual clarity. You weren't just awake. You were closer to God, closer to dreams, and perhaps even to something else. There are old folk stories about visions seen during the watch, like pale ladies at the foot of the bed, or murmuring shadows at the window. Were they dreams, hallucinations, or something that slithered through the cracks in time? Your body, meanwhile, accepts this routine without complaint. The first sleep winds down as your brain takes a breath. The middle time is quiet, undisturbed. Then second sleep hits, often even deeper than the first. And by sunrise, you're groggy, but you've technically slept well, sort of. The idea of sleeping 8 hours straight like a modern office worker would sound absurd. What are you? A merchant from the future? Oddly enough, some modern experiments have shown that when people are removed from artificial lighting and modern schedules, they naturally revert to segmented sleep patterns. Like some ancient clock hidden inside your skull wakes up and whispers, "Hey, you're supposed to be up now." And if you're wondering how the rich did it, yep, them too. Even kings woke up in the middle of the night. Some used the time to draft decrees or write poetry. Imagine Henry VIII sitting in bed, scribbling about taxes while burping up roast goose. Delightful. Meanwhile, back in your rustic bed, second sleep calls. The fire has dimmed. Your limbs feel heavier. You curl deeper under the blanket. Outside, a rooster considers whether it's too early to crow. You fade again, not fully aware of the dreams to come. Dreams shaped by half-sleep, candlelight, and 1,000 years of strange, sleepy tradition. You've officially survived the weirdness of segmented slumber, but don't nod off yet. There's much stranger stuff ahead. You wake up with a stiff neck, blinking slowly in the candlelit gloom. It's morning, technically, though the sun hasn't quite decided to show itself yet. Your body aches, but not in the way you'd expect after a night of rest. That's because your bed isn't really a bed. It's a narrow wooden box with high sides, like a coffin someone forgot to bury. And you've been sleeping almost upright, bundled in thick layers that feel more like a straitjacket than pajamas. This is upright sleep in medieval life. For many people, especially the poor and the devout, lying completely flat was considered risky, too corpse-like, too tempting for death to mistake you as ready for collection. So instead, they slept propped up, often sitting in what looked more like a church pew than anything resembling a mattress. You try to stretch your legs, but there's a wall at your feet. That's the sleep box. Common in some regions, it was like a small wooden closet with a door that shut you in for the night. Cozy or claustrophobic, depending on how fond you are of the dark and your own breath. At least it kept out the rats. The bed, or box, also served another purpose. It helped conserve heat. In homes where fireplaces were luxuries, sleeping curled up and enclosed helped retain precious warmth. The upright posture, on the other hand, helped some avoid snoring or heartburn. Others believed it prevented evil spirits from sitting on their chest, because apparently demons respect posture. You wrap a woolen shawl tighter around your shoulders and exhale into the cold air. Your breath hangs in front of you like a ghost. Nearby, a monk mumbles prayers in his sleep. That's right. You're not alone. Most people didn't sleep solo. Space was scarce, and warmth was communal. You might find yourself wedged between a cousin and a shepherd, or a nun with a hacking cough and a fondness for midnight conversation. One strange detail from some convents and monasteries is that certain monks and nuns were trained to sleep sitting fully upright, hands folded, eyes half closed, as if in eternal prayer. Imagine waking up every morning looking like you died in your sleep mid-sermon. Peaceful maybe, creepy definitely. There are woodcuts and early paintings showing sleepers in rigid postures, often bundled so tightly they resembled upright sausages with faces. Some scholars argue these illustrations were more symbolic than literal. Others think they reflect a very real cultural trend. There's still no clear answer. The line between medieval reality and medieval piety is always a bit blurry. And what about pillows? Don't expect a memory foam cloud. You'd be lucky to have a sack of straw or a block of carved wood. Some beds used a shared bolster, basically a giant pillow that ran along the head of the bed, propped against the wall. You'd lean back against it, shoulder to shoulder with whoever you were bunking with. It was intimate, if not entirely comfortable. Now let's talk about the beds themselves. Aside from the wooden boxes and benches, wealthier folks had actual four-poster beds with heavy curtains. Not for privacy in most cases, but for insulation. Drawing the curtains helped trap body heat, making the sleeping space warmer during those endless, bone-chilling winters. It also kept out the occasional bat or squirrel that might wander in from the rafters. But even in those grander sleeping arrangements, the idea of lying flat wasn't popular. Many slept on a slight incline, propped by bolsters or stacked blankets. Some even tied themselves into position with strips of cloth to avoid rolling over in the night. Imagine waking up mid-snore and realizing you're strapped down like a medieval astronaut. And while it might sound bizarre, upright sleeping wasn't unique to the Middle Ages. It appears in other cultures and eras too, especially among people with respiratory conditions. In medieval times, though, the reasoning often leaned more towards spiritual and superstitious than medical. You shift uncomfortably, trying to ease the cramp in your lower back. There's something oddly ceremonial about the way you're posed, almost like you're trying to look holy while drooling. It's a strange contrast, this mixture of bodily discomfort and spiritual aspiration. You're trying to sleep like a saint, but your hips are screaming like a blacksmith's anvil. And of course, we can't forget the role of penance. Sleeping uncomfortably was, in some religious communities, a form of self-discipline, a way to suffer a little each night, just enough to remind you that paradise wasn't here yet. Some ascetics even refused beds altogether, choosing instead to sleep on bare boards, stone floors, or upright in corners like forgotten brooms. You glance around the room. Shadows stretch and shift as the fire dies. Somewhere nearby, a floorboard creaks. Your fellow sleepers snore softly, sitting like statues. A dog shuffles beneath someone's feet. The atmosphere is quiet, reverent, and slightly unnerving. This kind of sleep, rigid, shared, half-sacred, is miles away from what you know today. And yet, it worked. People slept, woke, and did it again, day after day, year after year. Whether they were trying to ward off death, impress God, or just avoid rolling onto the cold stone floor, they found their own strange path to rest. Eventually, your eyelids grow heavy again. Your back aches, your neck is stiff, but there's something oddly calming about the predictability of it all. You're upright, you're warm enough, and for now, that's good enough. You lean back slightly and close your eyes, wondering what odd sleep ritual comes next. You wake with a snort, startled not by a nightmare, but by someone's foot pressing against your hip. You're not sure whose it is. Could be your sister's, could be the traveling merchant who paid for half the bed. Either way, you're stuck with it. That's because in the medieval world, sharing a bed wasn't just common, it was expected. Forget personal space. Beds were expensive, rooms were few, and heating was nearly non-existent. So people bundled up together, sometimes 5 or 6 to a mattress, in arrangements that would make a modern sleepover look like luxury. You shift slightly to avoid the sharp end of a snoring neighbor's elbow and try to remember whose turn it was to sleep by the warmest side of the fire. This wasn't just a peasant problem. Even kings and nobles often shared sleeping quarters with their attendants, guards, or guests. A traveling dignitary might be placed beside the local lord in a large bed, while servants curled up at their feet. Beds were social zones, negotiation arenas, and rumor factories rolled into one sagging mattress. You pull the blanket tighter as someone coughs behind you. In many households, siblings of all ages shared sleeping spaces. There wasn't much else to do with limited space and a growing family. Babies nestled between grandparents. Teenagers tried to avoid awkward eye contact with their cousins, and travelers, whether pilgrims, merchants, or messengers, often paid for the right to share a bed with a stranger. It was cheaper than renting an entire room and significantly warmer than sleeping outside with the goats. Not that the goats were always outside. In colder regions, animals often came indoors at night. A pig might sleep near the hearth, a hen could roost in the rafters, and the family dog, of course, curled up beside the youngest child, because even in the Middle Ages, dogs knew where to find the warmest heart. But what about the really odd pairings? Historical records show instances where monks shared beds with apprentices, soldiers bunked down with nobles, and widows rented out half of their bed to passing travelers. One particularly strange case mentions a 14th century abbot who shared his bed with a bishop and 2 scribes during a stormy journey. That's one way to discuss scripture. Not surprisingly, there were rules, both written and unspoken. You were expected to lie still, face the same direction as your bedmates, and absolutely never try anything suspicious. There are even court cases where bed sharing went wrong, often involving accusations of theft, assault, or the occasional romantic scandal. Yet despite the potential for awkwardness, this arrangement was seen as entirely practical. Warmth was survival, beds were expensive, and sleep, for all its mystique, was still just another necessity in a world that had little time for luxury. There's also the notion of trust. Sharing a bed meant vulnerability. You were at your most defenseless. If someone invited you into their bed, it meant you weren't a threat, or at least not one they couldn't handle in their sleep. Imagine being a guest in a rural inn and being told to climb into bed with two strangers already asleep. You wouldn't argue. You'd just wedge yourself in and pray no one had garlic breath. Some inns even had communal bed halls with massive mattresses or straw piles where guests slept side by side like sardines. You'd pay for a spot, not for privacy. The snoring was free of charge. So was the occasional lice infestation. And yes, sometimes things happened. Relationships bloomed, gossip spread, jealousy festered. But for the most part, people adapted. They accepted bed sharing as just another part of life, the same way they accepted smoky ceilings and cold porridge. Of course, there were exceptions. Nobles and clergy with enough wealth could afford private chambers. Royalty, in particular, had elaborate bedchambers with canopies, silks, and thick feather mattresses. But even then, the idea of being completely alone in bed was often foreign. Guards slept nearby. Attendants waited within earshot. Solitude was not the goal. Company was comfort. Back in your shared room, someone mutters in their sleep. A child whimpers. You shift again, this time careful not to disturb the snoring form beside you. It's strange how quickly you've adapted. The closeness no longer feels invasive. It feels safe, familiar, like being part of a body larger than your own. You stare at the ceiling beams, tracing the shadows cast by the dwindling fire. Sleep comes slower when you're pressed between bodies, but it comes nonetheless. There's a rhythm to it, a warmth that modern mattresses and personal space can't quite replicate. You think back to the upright sleepers from before, to the idea of sleeping in boxes, and now you're here, flattened beside strangers, your elbow grazing someone's knee. It's not glamorous, it's not even particularly clean, but it's human, deeply, weirdly human. You close your eyes again. In the distance, someone farts quietly. You pretend not to hear it. This is boring history, but it's also real and oddly comforting. You wake before the rooster this time. Your face is warm, but your feet feel like frozen turnips. That's what a medieval bedroom does to you. The fire has gone out, and the breath of your fellow sleepers hangs in the frigid morning air like little ghosts. You wrap your head tighter in your nightcap, a thick wool sock of a thing that makes you look like a sad elf, and try not to think about the pig snuffling under your bed. Yes, a pig, maybe even two. In many peasant homes, animals didn't just sleep indoors, they slept right in the bedroom. They were valuable, and valuable things were kept close, not left to freeze outside or wander off in the night. The result was a house that smelled like smoke, sweat, wet hay, and at least one confused chicken. The floor beneath you is packed dirt. The ceiling beams above are streaked black with soot. Up in the rafters, cobwebs tangled together beside strips of dried meat hung to cure. You wonder, just for a second, if anything ever falls from up there during the night. That salty tang on your pillow the other morning suddenly seems a little suspicious. This was daily life. Entire families curled up in a single room, heat rising from the hearth, their own bodies, and the occasional goat asleep in the corner. Everything was steeped in the smell of smoke. Thick, constant smoke. Most homes didn't have chimneys, so firelight drifted upward and darkened everything it touched. Your lungs adapted, or didn't. You coughed your way through it and called it comfort. You get up quietly and tiptoe toward the hearth, hoping to coax back the fire. Your toes sting on the cold ground. You step on something round and squishy. You hope it's a potato. You don't check. The hearth sits still. A few glowing embers pulse softly in the ash. You blow on them, add twigs, and feed the warmth back to life. Not just for the heat, but for the light. In these hours before dawn, the fire is the only thing in the room that feels truly awake. You sit beside it, rubbing your hands, and your thoughts drift to nightcaps. Not the kind in a glass, but the kind you tie under your chin. People believed that keeping your head warm during sleep helped conserve body heat. It wasn't about style, it was about not freezing. These caps were long, soft, and usually tied tight enough to make you look like you were about to audition for a traveling tragedy. You wear yours proudly. Without it, your ears would go stiff from the cold, and it also helps soften the sounds of the pig's little night grunts, which is, in a strange way, kind of peaceful. Then there's the bed itself, or what passes for one. Many people slept on straw pallets, rolled out at night and shoved aside in the morning. Others had rope beds, made from wooden frames and thick cords strung across to support a mattress. As the ropes loosened, you had to tighten them to avoid sagging to the floor. That's actually where the phrase "sleep tight" comes from. Eventually those ropes would stretch out again, the mattress would flatten, and sleep would become a battle between your spine and the laws of physics. You curled toward the middle of the bed, because that's where the dip was deepest. If your bed partner rolled in too, that just meant more body heat or more snoring. Either way, your posture suffered. Still, despite the cold and the closeness and the endless smoke, sleep was taken seriously. People hung bundles of herbs near their beds, lavender, rosemary, or garlic, not just for scent, but to ward off sickness and whatever unseen things might creep in at night. Superstition wasn't separate from routine, it was part of it. You're still sitting by the fire, half awake. Outside, a cart creaks somewhere in the distance. A dog barks, then another. The village is beginning to stir, but slowly, as if it too slept badly. You think back to the rhythm of medieval sleep, the way it came in two halves. You've already felt the first. What you didn't know is that many people used the hours between sleeps to get things done. Quiet things, mending a tear in a tunic, whispering prayers, even knocking on a neighbor's door for a borrowed needle or a little gossip. It wasn't strange, it was social, a kind of soft connection that happened under the cover of darkness, like medieval texting, just slower and colder. Others used that time to reflect, to process dreams, to think about the day ahead. Sleep wasn't just rest. It was a rhythm you floated through, and the pauses in between were just as human as the dreaming. You ease yourself back down now, pulling the blanket over your shoulders. The fire behind you crackles softly. The smoke swirls overhead in slow motion, suspended in the chilled air. The pig has stopped snoring. The room settles into silence. You look around at the strange little world of your sleep. The bundled herbs, the smoky beams, the snoring family, the rope bed, the wool cap on your head, and the heat rising from a tired hearth that never quite goes out. It's not glamorous, it's not even quiet, but it is real. Everything here belongs to sleep in its own clumsy human way. You close your eyes. The second sleep is near, and somehow it feels right. You don't wake up slowly this time, you jolt. There's a weight on your chest, a pressure that doesn't belong to the blanket or the pig or the air. It's cold, dense, and ancient. You try to move, but your limbs feel heavy, like you've been buried in earth. Your eyes flick to the rafters, then to the dark corner of the room. You know something's there, watching. You don't know how, but you do. This is how people described it. The night hag, the old crone, the shadow that rides your chest and steals your breath while you sleep. In the Middle Ages, they didn't call it sleep paralysis. They called it a visitation, a punishment, a warning, and they were terrified. These weren't just bad dreams. Nightmares in medieval times were often seen as real, tangible threats from the other side. Demons, ghosts, witches, or lost souls were all capable of slipping through cracks in the night and settling right on top of you. If you woke screaming and gasping for air, it wasn't because of your nervous system. It was because something evil had been there. To protect against this, people developed routines. Rituals, entire systems of bedtime defense. Before lying down, you might say a specific prayer or recite protective verses. You could place a knife under your pillow, sharp edge facing out, to ward off spirits, or tuck a small iron object beneath the bed. Iron was thought to repel the unnatural. And then there were the charms. Bundles of herbs tied with red string, wax seals etched with protective symbols, a pouch of salt sewn into the hem of your nightshirt, all of it done silently, carefully, while others around you pretended they weren't doing the exact same thing. Even the layout of the room mattered. Beds placed away from windows, crosses scratched into door frames, cats welcomed inside not just for warmth, but as spiritual guards. People didn't just believe in these things, they lived by them. You roll over and glance at the ceiling again. There's soot, sure, but also something more. Scratches, marks, maybe just old wood splitting, or maybe something carved there long ago, a forgotten sign to keep the shadows away. This is history for sleep, but it's not boring. Not when your ancestors genuinely believed they might not wake up in the same body they went to bed in. Some of them didn't sleep at all on certain nights. The eves of major holidays were thought to be spiritually volatile. Midwinter, All Hallows, Walpurgis, nights when the boundary between worlds got thin enough for things to pass through. And what about dreams? In modern times, they're just subconscious fireworks. In the medieval world, dreams could be prophecy, warning, or punishment. If you dreamt of falling, it might mean someone cursed you. If you dreamt of fire, your sins were catching up. If you dreamt of your own funeral, it could be a sign from a spirit trying to take your place. Not surprisingly, dream interpretation was its own cottage industry. Local healers, clergy, or even traveling charlatans offered to explain what your dreams meant in exchange for coin or favor. Sometimes they offered remedies: sleep facing east, avoid certain foods, bury a blessed stone under your bed. Sleep, in other words, became spiritual combat, and not everyone handled it well. There are records of people who refused to sleep indoors, who built small sleeping huts near churches, who lined their rooms with garlic and holy water. Fear of the night was more than superstition. It was a survival strategy. You sit up now, still feeling a little tightness in your chest. You look down and notice the knife tucked under your straw pillow. You don't remember putting it there. Maybe it was your mother. Maybe the old woman from next door who always mutters when she walks past your doorframe. You're not alone in this fear. Even wealthy nobles kept protective items near their beds: swords, amulets, scriptures. A bishop's castle was once found to have dozens of holy texts nailed to the ceiling beams above the bed, just in case. And what about children? They were especially vulnerable. Parents placed amulets in cradles, carved protective symbols into crib legs, whispered blessings before sleep, hoping to guard their little ones from the wandering eyes of whatever lurked in the shadows. You lie back again, slower this time. The fire has shrunk to orange coals. The pig shifts in its sleep. Outside, something creaks. Maybe a shutter. Maybe not. This is what boring history never tells you. That sleep wasn't peaceful. It was a negotiated truce between body, spirit, and whatever might be waiting on the other side of the dark. It was filled with habits, fears, protections, and a deep belief that the night wasn't empty. You feel your body start to relax again. The weight is gone. The air is still cool, but no longer hostile. You pull the blanket up to your chin and stare toward the window, watching for a flicker, just in case. No one said weird sleep habits of medieval people were comfortable, but they made sense when the world felt like a place where anything might come for you while you dreamed. You wake again, but this time not in bed. You're sitting on a wooden bench, your back against a cold stone wall. Your eyes are puffy and there's a faint ache in your neck from sleeping upright. Around you, a dozen others doze in similar postures. Heads bobbing, mouths slightly open, hands folded or hanging limp. You're in church, or a courtroom, or maybe a crowded tavern. It's hard to tell. In the Middle Ages, sleep didn't only happen at night or behind closed doors. People slept everywhere, and often they were expected to. Monks nodded off during long sermons. Jurors napped during legal proceedings. Bakers dozed while waiting for the dough to rise. Public sleep wasn't a failure, it was normal. You glance at the man beside you. He's wearing robes, might be a judge, might be a priest. His chin rests on his chest, completely at peace. No one stares, no one scolds. In this world, drifting off is part of the rhythm. The day swells and shrinks around moments of unconsciousness. Nobody thinks it strange. But not all public sleep was ordinary. Some claimed visions came more clearly in places filled with people. In the 14th century, a woman fainted during a sermon and woke speaking Latin, claiming she had seen angels and heard voices calling her by name. Others told of dreams revealing crimes, illnesses, or future floods. Dreaming was a way of knowing, and sometimes that knowing spilled out in front of a crowd. You shift on the bench, the wood digs into your back, someone behind you snores quietly. You can feel the whole room breathing, slow and uneven. This isn't sleep as escape, it's sleep as background hum. Sleep could even be punishment. Bed arrest wasn't always about healing. It could be a sentence, a way to isolate someone touched by illness, madness, or sin. The sleeper would be confined to bed, sometimes for weeks. Visitors might pray over them. Others left food at the edge of the room, not daring to step closer. In the worst cases, relics were hung from the rafters. Words were whispered through walls. Sleep was both medicine and exile. And still, people found their way into dreams. They slept under carts, on sacks of grain, on the floor beside church pews. Children dozed in corners while their parents worked. Shepherds napped in fields with sheep pressed against their legs. Sleep followed people like a shadow. It waited for any opening. Some even claimed to sleep for others. Dreamers by trade, hired to seek signs and omens while in trance. A noble might ask such a person to sleep on their behalf before a major decision. These dreamers often had rituals, specific beds, specific clothes, foods avoided, candles arranged in patterns. Whether they dreamed or performed didn't matter. The people believed the message. You walk again now, through a narrow alley, the sky still a soft blue-grey. A child sleeps curled under a market table. A dog snores beside a crate. You don't disturb them. You know what they're doing is sacred in its own way. Back inside, you return to a bed that feels strangely familiar. You see the fire, now reduced to soft glow. You smell herbs hanging from the rafter. You hear the faint squeak of straw as you lie down. You pull the blanket close. Your body sinks into the rope frame. You remember everything from this journey, the segmented sleep, the night demons, the shared warmth, the sharp edge under the pillow, the dream talkers, the public nappers, the restless nights soothed by ritual, by belief, by sheer exhaustion. This wasn't just rest. It was boring history lived in the dark. It was history for sleep, shaped by the flicker of firelight and the need to survive until morning. You close your eyes, not because you're tired, but because sleep has always waited for you, wherever you are. And now, it returns. Guys, tonight we tumble headfirst into the strange, heavy sleep rituals of ancient Greece, where even the gods had nighttime routines we'd call unhinged today. Imagine warm winds brushing your skin, the scent of burning bay leaves in the air, and a golden canopy above. You lie in a temple courtyard, eyes closed, heart thudding, because you know who might visit you in the dark. And no, it's not a comforting presence. It's Zeus, and he doesn't knock. This is boring history for sleep, but not the kind that puts you to sleep out of boredom. It's the kind that coils softly around your ears, one vine at a time, until you forget which century you're in. And trust me, by the time we get to Dionysus's wine-fueled blackout rituals, you probably won't survive this with your dignity intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you're listening. Are you in a quiet cabin at 11:43 p.m. or on a crowded train trying to ignore the world at noon? You're floating now, somewhere between a dream and a memory. You're reclining in the clouds above Mount Olympus, except the cushions are made of light and the gods are anything but sleepy. At the center of it all is Zeus, sky god, thunder king, master of order and chaos. And according to nearly every myth, he never ever slept alone. That wasn't just gossip, it was ritual. Zeus's nights were orchestrated like ceremonies. His divine bed, often described as shimmering and radiant, was less a piece of furniture and more a throne of power. Every mortal or goddess who shared that bed wasn't simply resting, she was stepping into a contract, whether she knew it or not. You imagine stretching out beside him, heartbeat loud, eyes never fully closed, because sleeping next to Zeus meant you were about to become part of a myth or a cautionary tale. Take Alcmene. She was tricked into sleeping with Zeus when he disguised himself as her husband. In that twisted version of bedtime seduction, she believed she was cuddling her mortal spouse. 9 months later, she gave birth to Heracles. Even worse, Zeus prolonged the night, stretching it to 3 times its normal length just to savor the moment. Imagine lying there, watching the stars refuse to move, time itself bending for a god's pleasure. That's not romance, that's divine insomnia. And then there's the case of Europa. No temples, no wine, no whispering priests, just a quiet girl on the beach, drowsy from the sun. Zeus turned into a bull, because of course he did, and whisked her away while she was drifting off into that perfect seaside nap. If you're trying to get rest in ancient Greece, you better double-check your livestock. But it wasn't just women who had to fear sleep. Even the gods approached it with caution. The Greeks believed sleep was a threshold, a doorway between the conscious and the divine. And what better place for Zeus to wield power than in dreams? In some myths, he sends messages to sleeping kings to manipulate them into war. In Homer's Iliad, he sends a lying dream to Agamemnon, telling him to attack the Trojans. It's not a metaphor. The dream takes on a shape, whispers into the king's ear, and then vanishes. You turn in your bed, blanket pulled up to your chin, wondering if that strange image in your sleep last night was really just a dream. Here's the weird bit. Historians still argue whether the ancient Greeks saw these dream visits as real, like physical events, or symbolic, like we do. Some believe temples like those at Epidaurus were built specifically for divine dream communication. Patients would sleep inside and wait for gods to diagnose or heal them through visions, which means, in a way, Zeus had his own brand of sleep clinics. And let's not forget Hera. She wasn't exactly thrilled about Zeus's bedroom escapades. Some myths say she drug him to get him to sleep, not for peace, but for revenge. There's a whole tale where Hera teams up with Hypnos, the god of sleep, to knock Zeus out so she can sabotage his war plans. Picture it, even the king of Olympus snoring through a scheme. But Hypnos is another shadow entirely, and we'll follow him soon. For now, you're resting in that dangerous glow, where thunderclouds hum just above your lashes. You know Zeus is near, not because you hear him, but because the wind has stopped moving and the stars blink slower. That's how you know you've wandered into divine territory. And here's your fringe fact, to file under definitely not comforting. Some ancient priests slept with weapons next to them inside the temples of Zeus, just in case the gods didn't like their dreams. Sleep in that world wasn't peaceful, it was tactical. So as you curl deeper into this strange, god-haunted night, remember this: you might be lying under blankets, but your soul is already halfway up Olympus, wondering if the next breath of wind is divine or dangerous. You're lying flat on a cold stone slab now. It smells like iron and dust, and something else you can't quite place. It's earthy and slick, like wet leather. That's because underneath your back is a sheet of snakeskin, fresh, still warm. And this is exactly what you signed up for, because in ancient Greece, if you wanted answers from the gods, you had to dream them. And sometimes you had to dream them while sharing your bed with serpents. This isn't just any temple. You're in the Encometerion, the sacred sleeping chamber of the healing god Asclepius. His followers believed that dreams weren't random brain static. They were messages straight from the gods, carefully crafted and delivered while you slept. And the closer you could get to those gods, the clearer the signal. Which is why you're now trying to fall asleep in a dark room with snakes slithering around your ankles. It's called incubation, and it was one of the strangest medical rituals in ancient Greek life. You would lie there for hours, sometimes days, waiting to dream something, anything, that could explain your illness, your future, your fate. Priests would record your dreams and offer interpretations. If you dreamed of swimming in honey, maybe your infection would clear up. If you dreamed of fire in your stomach, maybe your death was near. And if you dreamed of nothing at all, well, that might have been the worst omen of all. This is where sleep became a weapon, or at least a diagnostic tool. You weren't just resting, you were submitting to the gods, giving them full access to your unconscious mind. In some sanctuaries, the snakes were literal, non-venomous, sure, but still unsettling. In others, the dreams were induced with herbs, chants, or rhythmic drumming. One ancient source even mentions breathing in the breath of Apollo, which could have referred to smoke from burning laurel, or just an awkward way to describe hallucinating inside a smoke-filled room. You shift under the snakeskin and wonder how anyone managed to relax like this. But then again, some people came here from far-off villages, limping, blind, or on the brink of death. This was their last hope. A dream or nothing. And while it sounds bizarre now, these temples were the closest thing to hospitals that many ancient Greeks ever knew. The most famous site for this kind of ritual sleep was Epidaurus, a sprawling sanctuary dedicated to Asclepius, complete with theatres, gymnasiums, and the great abaton, where the dream healing happened. You walk through its columns now in your mind. The moonlight spills over marble. You feel the weight of centuries pressing into the stone and the whisper of thousands of dreams that once filled the air. Historians still debate how effective this practice really was. Some suggest that priests might have used sleight of hand to cure the sick after reading their dreams. Others believe that the process was psychosomatic and that just the act of believing in the divine message was enough to trigger healing. There are even records carved into stone documenting supposed miracles. A man comes in blind, sleeps in the temple, wakes up seeing. Coincidence or cure? The records don't care. They just list the results. But this wasn't just for healing the body. Sleep was a path to prophecy, and nowhere did that belief get stranger than at Delphi. The Oracle of Delphi, the Pythia, didn't exactly dream her visions, but she did enter a trance-like state that mimicked sleep. Some accounts say she sat above a crack in the earth, breathing in fumes that sent her into a stupor. Others claim it was music or ritual dancing, or simply the weight of ritual itself that brought on the visions. But always, there was a kind of stillness, a moment of surrender, where she slipped out of herself and into the voice of Apollo. You picture her now, seated in the temple, her eyes rolled back, body swaying. She mutters something you don't understand. The priests write it down, smooth the words, then hand you a riddle. That's your answer. That's your divine wisdom. And somehow, you're supposed to make sense of it. But dreams weren't always sought out. Sometimes they hunted people down. One fringe tale mentions a woman named Maya, a priestess who was said to be dream-touched. She didn't go to temples or seek visions. She simply fell asleep, anywhere, at any time, and saw things. Real things. Wars before they happened. Deaths before the illness. People started fearing her, not because she was wrong, but because she was almost always right. Some believed she was blessed by Apollo. Others thought she was cursed. Eventually, her own village banned her from sleeping within city walls. They feared her dreams more than disease. And just like that, you're back on the slab. You're not sick, you're not dying, but you're still here, lying still, trying to listen. The skin of the snake shifts slightly beneath your spine. A drum beats slowly in the distance. The herbs are beginning to work. You feel your eyes getting heavy, your breath slowing, and just before the dark takes you, you hear a whisper. Not in your ear, but somewhere deep in your mind. You're not sure what it says, but you know one thing: you'll wake up changed. The ground beneath you softens. Stone turns to soil, warm and pulsing with the breath of something ancient. You are not in a temple anymore. You are walking toward a cave hidden at the edge of the world, where no sun ever reaches, and no god dares speak above a whisper. This is the domain of Hypnos, god of sleep. You feel it before you see it. The scent of poppies hangs thick in the air, not the bright garden variety, but heavy, dusky red blooms, growing wild in tangled clumps along the cave mouth. As you step closer, petals fall gently onto your shoulders. They stick like velvet. Somewhere nearby, water trickles, slow and constant, like a heartbeat under the earth. In the myths, Hypnos lives in a dark cave near the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. The entrance is surrounded by herbs, roots, and of course poppies, all symbols of sleep and dreams. No birds sing here, no light burns. Even the air seems to hum with exhaustion. This is not just a cave, it's a portal into unbeing. You step inside. Your feet sink slightly into soft moss. Above you, the roof curves low and uneven, like the inside of a skull. The silence is so deep it almost roars. In the center of the space lies Hypnos, curled on a bed of black feathers. He doesn't move, he doesn't speak. His eyes are always closed, but somehow he knows you're here. In Greek mythology, Hypnos is a quiet god, but powerful. Even Zeus couldn't resist his touch. One myth tells of how Hera bribed Hypnos to put Zeus to sleep so she could sabotage a battle. At first, Hypnos refused. He knew what Zeus would do if he woke up enraged. But eventually, Hera offered him a prize too tempting, one of the Graces, a divine woman of joy and beauty, as his bride. Hypnos agreed. He lulled Zeus to sleep, and Hera got her revenge. The next time Zeus awoke, he searched for Hypnos with thunder in his voice, but the god of sleep had vanished into his cave beyond reach. You sit now across from him. The floor is littered with petals, bones, and fragments of half-remembered dreams. They cling to your ankles as you breathe in the poppy-rich air. A wave of calm rolls over your chest, slow and deep, like the tide returning home. Hypnos doesn't look at you, but somehow you feel seen. The Greeks didn't separate sleep from death the way we do. Hypnos had a twin brother, Thanatos, the god of peaceful death. They were born from Nyx, the primordial goddess of night. Sleep and death, two sides of the same coin, both gentle, both inevitable. But while Thanatos came for you only once, Hypnos visited every night. He was the more dangerous of the two, because he always came back. Some scholars argue that the ancient Greeks feared Hypnos more than they feared Thanatos. Sleep could bring dreams, yes, but also revelations, madness, or loss. And you could never quite be sure what part of yourself would return in the morning. The soul, they believed, left the body during sleep. It wandered, floated, met other souls or gods. That's why sudden awakenings were seen as dangerous. You might catch your soul before it found its way back. You lie down beside Hypnos now. You're not afraid. Not exactly, but there's a tightness in your chest, like you're forgetting something important. The poppies rustle gently as you close your eyes. Here's a fringe detail that doesn't get enough attention. Some ancient Greek tombs show Hypnos and Thanatos carrying the bodies of the dead together side by side. It wasn't just symbolic, it was reassurance. that even in death you were cradled in the same arms that rocked you to sleep. That dying was just one last very long nap. You're starting to feel that now. The edges of your mind blur. You remember a sound from years ago, your grandmother's voice maybe, or the clink of cups in a quiet kitchen, something comforting, something you haven't heard in decades. That's Hypnos at work. He doesn't take you violently. He leads you by the hand into memory. Historians still debate how real the cult of Hypnos ever was. There's little archaeological evidence of formal temples, but he appears often in art and poetry, always nearby, always watching. Some believe his worship was folded into other cults, Asclepius, Dionysus, even Hecate. Others think his power was simply too subtle for altar offerings. You didn't pray to Hypnos. You surrendered to him. And now you do. The cave breathes around you. The petals pulse with color. You feel yourself dissolve a little, like mist in the morning sun. Not gone, just less solid. Hypnos still lies beside you, unmoving. You wonder what he dreams, if he dreams at all. Before sleep fully takes you, one last image floats by. A man with wide, frightened eyes, standing at the edge of this very cave. He has fought sleep for 3 days straight, hoping to avoid the vision he knows waits for him. But now, he's here, and Hypnos is waiting. You realize too late that the dream you're entering might not be your own. You're lying in a straw-filled hut now, and it's well past midnight. The wind outside rattles dry olive branches against the clay walls, and your eyes are wide open, stinging with fatigue. You've tried everything, counting stars, whispering prayers, chewing herbs until your tongue is numb, but sleep won't come. And in ancient Greece, that meant something was wrong. Not just with your body, but with your soul. Insomnia wasn't just inconvenient back then. It was dangerous, a sign that your spirit might be out of alignment or worse, under attack. You shift under a coarse wool blanket, and a soft knock at the door pulls you upright. It's the healer, old, stooped, and carrying a clay pot that smells like rust and soil. You don't need to ask what it is. Goat's blood, warm, fresh, still steaming from the jug. She kneels beside you and dips her fingers into the pot. She starts to chant in low, humming tones, drawing a circle on your bare feet with the thick red liquid. Then she presses a sprig of dried rue into your palm and wraps it closed with a strip of linen. "Don't open your hand," she says, "not until morning." Not. This was folk medicine at its most intimate. Not the polished ceremonies of the temple, but the whispered, desperate rituals of villagers who couldn't afford or trust the gods. The line between healing and superstition was thin, and sleep was often the battlefield. The Greeks had a word for dream-induced healing, incubatio, but they also had less elegant terms for those who couldn't dream at all. A sleepless person was seen as spiritually unanchored, vulnerable to madness, or even possession. In the more remote regions, insomnia could earn you suspicion. They might think you were cursed, or worse, that you'd seen something you weren't supposed to. And so, they turned to the village healers, mostly women, mostly feared. They used poppy extract when they could get it, but that was expensive. More often they used mugwort, valerian root, or myrrh smoked over coals. They chanted prayers to Hypnos or Hecate, burned feathers, smeared animal blood across the forehead, not because they thought it was beautiful, but because they were out of options. Here's something strange. One documented ritual involved placing a live toad under the pillow of an insomniac. The idea was that the toad would absorb the restlessness. In the morning, the creature was buried, along with the sleeplessness. Whether it worked is debatable. Whether the toad agreed to this role is another matter entirely. You roll over now, still awake. The goat's blood on your feet is drying, tightening your skin. The sprig of rue in your hand itches, but you don't dare open your fist. The healer has dozed off beside you, her back against the wall. You envy her. The fire has burned down to coals. In the flickering half-light, you start to see shapes in the smoke. Faces, maybe, or just your imagination playing tricks? You blink, slowly, and think of a man named Ariston, whose story was carved into stone in a small town near Corinth. He hadn't slept for 15 nights. His family believed he was being haunted by a nymph he had once insulted. A healer was called. No temples, no sacrifices, just a basin of spring water, a coin wrapped in beeswax, and a soft lullaby sung backward. That night, Ariston finally slept. The next morning, he woke up screaming and never spoke again. Some said the nymph had claimed part of his voice. Others said the healer had succeeded, but the dream was too much for him to bear. Historians are still unsure whether cases like Ariston's were exaggerated, real, or completely invented to explain mental illness. Ancient Greece didn't have a concept for psychosomatic disorder or chronic anxiety, but they absolutely had names for people who couldn't sleep, and they feared them. Here's the weird part. The very same plants used in those rituals, valerian, poppy, mugwort, are still used in herbal sleep remedies today. The science behind them may be clearer now, but the methods haven't changed much. Replace the goat's blood with melatonin gummies and the whispered chants with white noise machines, and the difference becomes more stylistic than functional. You stretch your legs now. The straw rustles beneath you. The old healer stirs in her sleep, then goes still again. You wonder what she dreams about. Do the healers ever get rest? Or do they stay up all night carrying the weight of other people's nightmares? And just when your thoughts begin to drift, a strange calm washes over your body. Not sleep yet, but the beginning of surrender. Your fingers loosen slightly. The rue slips a little in your palm, and you let it rest there like a sleeping bird. You don't know if it's the herbs, the blood, or the exhaustion, but your mind is quiet for the first time in days. Outside, the wind has stopped. The sky, barely visible through the narrow window, is pale and open. You are no longer waiting for sleep. You are being pulled toward it, not gently, not violently, just inevitably. You wake up somewhere else. The air smells like crushed grapes, wood smoke, and something sweet rotting just beneath the surface. You're no longer in a hut or a temple. You're lying on woven reeds in a crowded field, surrounded by laughter, music, and the dull thump of drums echoing from hills beyond the trees. You've landed in the middle of a festival, and not just any festival. This is one of Dionysus's great sleep feasts, where wine flows like water, and consciousness is not just surrendered, but celebrated. All around you, people are dancing barefoot in the dirt. Their robes are loose, streaked with ash and honey, their hair tangled with ivy and crushed figs. You sit up slowly. Your body is heavy, but your spirit is somehow lighter. In the cult of Dionysus, sleep was a side effect, a destination, and a ritual all at once. You didn't just fall asleep, you collapsed into the arms of the god himself. The Greeks called this state ecstasis, a stepping outside of the self. They believed that to truly meet Dionysus, you had to lose all grip on control. That meant drinking until your voice slurred, dancing until your legs gave out, and laughing until your memories spilled out like wine on the floor. You walk through the crowd now. Someone presses a cup into your hands. It's clay, warm from the sun. You take a sip. It's spiced, sour, unfamiliar. It burns, then settles. Around you, people are slumping into each other, falling asleep mid-song, mid-laugh, mid-cry. This isn't ordinary drunkenness, it's sacred. Dionysian sleep wasn't restful. It was chaotic, emotional, raw. The kind of sleep that strips away masks and leaves only the truth. You didn't dream in quiet images. You dreamed in fevered color, in voices that weren't yours, in fire and thunder and strange hands on your chest. And when you woke up, you were changed. Some ancient texts describe the Maenads, female followers of Dionysus, falling into trance sleep after long nights of music and dance. They would collapse wherever they stood, sometimes under trees, sometimes in caves, sometimes right there in the open fields. When they woke, they claimed to have seen visions, not peaceful gods, terrifying ones, eyes in the sky, teeth in the earth, time unraveling, but also healing. They said their pain was drawn out of them in sleep and left behind in the grass. You find a quiet spot now, just beyond the firelight. Someone has drawn a spiral into the dirt beside you. You don't know who did it. You don't care. You lie down. The drums are still pounding in the distance, but slower now, like a heartbeat at rest. There's one story you can't stop thinking about. A man named Thestor, a follower of Dionysus who was struck mute after witnessing something in a dream. He wandered from village to village, writing poems in charcoal on walls and sleeping in wine-stained robes. People called him touched or cursed or divine. No one knows what he saw, but when he finally died under a fig tree in Thebes, his last words were, "He never left me." Historians still debate what these rituals were really about. Were they just excuses to get drunk in the name of the gods? Or was something deeper happening? There's evidence that Dionysian festivals included sleep chambers, padded with moss and lined with cloth, where worshippers were led after they collapsed. Some priests would whisper stories into their ears as they slept, seeding dreams like planting vines. Others just watched, recording movements, murmurs, the twitch of a hand. They believed sleep was a mirror of the divine. Here's a strange little fact. Some amphorae, wine jugs from the 5th century BCE, show scenes of people lying on the ground, asleep with smiles on their faces, not passed out, not sick, just at peace, surrounded by wine and song, as if sleep wasn't the end of the ritual, but its purpose. And you're starting to understand why. Your body is heavier now. Your hands no longer want to move. The cup has rolled out of your fingers and spilled into the grass. The fire crackles nearby, and for a second it sounds like someone whispering your name. You turn your head. No one's there. You close your eyes. The ground is warm. The music is distant. A vine brushes your cheek. You think of Thestor again, of his charcoal words, of his final whisper. You don't know what he saw. You don't need to, because now you feel it too, that strange presence in the sleep. Not threatening, just watching, just waiting. And in the flicker between consciousness and dreams, you realize something that sobers you more than any cold water ever could. You didn't fall asleep here. You were brought. You're underwater now. Not drowning, just floating. The sea is quiet, the surface far above you, rippling like silk. You aren't breathing, but you're not gasping either. Sleep has pulled you into a place that doesn't follow rules. And as your body floats lower, you begin to see faces in the dark, eyes that flick open with every heartbeat. Lips that don't move, yet speak in a language older than words. This is the realm of dreams, but not the soft kind. These aren't the dreams that gently unwind your day or let you fly through pastel skies. These are the other kind, the ones that deliver warnings, change fates, and sometimes kill. In ancient Greece, dreams were taken seriously, very seriously. A good dream could be a blessing, a sign that the gods were watching over you. But a bad one, that could mean doom. The Greeks didn't dismiss nightmares. They recorded them, dissected them, and sometimes built entire decisions around them. Battles were cancelled, marriages called off, children hidden, all because someone saw a burning tree or a bleeding moon or their own face melting in a dream. You walk now through a quiet house in Athens. It's night, and the wind carries the smell of sea salt and lemon leaves. Inside, a man stirs in his sleep, mumbling something that sounds like prophecy. His wife watches from the corner, clutching a bowl of milk and ash. If he speaks the name of a god, she must pour the bowl on the doorstep by dawn. That was the rule. Otherwise, the god might take offense, or worse, follow the dream out of his mouth and into the house. One famous dream changed a war. Before the Battle of Marathon, a soldier claimed to see a giant ghost rising from the earth, beckoning toward the battlefield. He told his commander. The army made offerings the next morning, and when they won, they credited the victory to that dream. No one asked whether it was real. That wasn't the point. The dream had spoken, and they had listened. You lie back again, this time in a room where the air smells of wax and rosemary. A priest stands over you with closed eyes. He is not sleeping, but waiting. Waiting for you to fall deep enough that he can begin the ritual. Because in certain temples, dreams weren't just received, they were extracted. Through murmured prayers, hypnotic music, and burning herbs, they would try to guide your dreams towards specific answers. Want to know if your crops will grow? Want to know if your unborn child is blessed or cursed? Lie down, close your eyes, and open the door. Whatever steps through will be your truth. Historians still debate whether these dream rituals were meant to manipulate or to comfort. Some say it was theater, designed to calm the desperate. Others argue that the belief in divine dreams was so strong, even the priests believed it. There are no clear records of what happened if a dream revealed something terrible. But there are plenty of quiet mentions. Dreams predicting plagues, drownings, betrayals. And always, someone would be sent away quietly the next day. Here's something eerie. A clay tablet found near Delphi includes a warning carved in rushed script. She saw fire in her womb and the stars screamed. Do not marry her. No names. Just that. A single dream. A ruined life. You shift on your back. The cave or temple or whatever space you're in now is warm. Not comfortable, but not hostile either. You feel like you're being watched, but not judged. Like the dream itself is curious about you. The silence presses against your ears. Your heartbeat sounds distant, like someone else's. And just when you think you might finally drift into nothing, the dream speaks. Not in words, not even in images, just in a knowing. You suddenly feel certain about something you didn't know a moment ago. A decision you haven't made yet becomes clear. A fear you couldn't name before has a face now. This is the power of the dream, not to predict, but to reveal. Asclepius once said that all healing begins in the mind, and all truth begins in sleep, or at least that's what his followers claimed. You don't remember where you heard it. Maybe in a dream. Maybe right now. You start to wake, but the dream doesn't let go. It lingers, like fog in your lungs, like salt on your skin. You sit up slowly. The fire is out. The priest is gone. Only the scent of rosemary remains. And just as you begin to rise, you realize something chilling. That wasn't your dream. It belonged to someone else, someone long dead, someone who once lay where you're lying now, eyes shut, hands still, listening to the gods whisper from the dark. And now their dream has passed into you. Guys, tonight we drift quietly into the forgotten pages of boring history for sleep, but not the dry kind your teachers mumbled through. This is the kind that wraps around you like a woolen cloak, heavy with secrets, soft with moss, and warmer than it should be for a battlefield tale. You lie there, half asleep, the scent of horses and wet metal thick in the air, your fingers brushing a patch of blood-stiffened linen. Somewhere nearby, boots crunch over frost, but they don't belong to a man. Not tonight. We're diving into the lives of Jeanne's sisters, the women warriors of the Middle Ages that history largely erased or simplified. Not just Jeanne d'Arc, whose name you do know, but the many others who fought, bled, and were buried without fanfare. And trust me, by the time we unravel the layers of noblewomen with swords, disguised mercenaries, and battlefield nuns, you probably won't survive this with your romantic notions of medieval chivalry intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And in the comments, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. That way, we can all drift off together, no matter how far apart we are. You begin your quiet walk not beside Jeanne, but behind her, through whispers, through smoke, through those strange places in history that don't quite light up on the map. While Jeanne's legend blazes like a comet, divine, bright, tragic, it casts shadows. And in those shadows are women whose stories didn't make it into textbooks, but left footprints deep enough to follow. Imagine yourself in a French village, early 15th century. The air is still raw from war. Thatched roofs sag under the weight of soot. Somewhere, a church bell rings, not for prayer, but for warning. You stand among peasants who speak in hushed tones. There was another, they say, another girl in armor. But no one remembers her name. Boring history for sleep likes to tidy things up. It likes to say, there was one girl, her name was Jeanne, she was special, the rest followed. But reality, as always, is messier. Women were not just followers. Some were commanders, others were saboteurs. A few were holy, a few were bloodthirsty, and some were simply forgotten because their victories didn't fit the right mold. Take, for example, a young woman in Burgundy, not long after Jeanne's first victory at Orléans. She rode with a small band, swords strapped to her back, not for visions or voices, but because the English murdered her brother. She was never sainted. She never wore a dress again. Locals called her the Mute One because she spoke only in battle. She likely died in a ditch. No one wrote her story, but you feel her now, don't you? Breathing behind your left shoulder. There's something magnetic about Jeanne d'Arc's rise, a teenage girl claiming she heard saints and then convincing hardened generals to let her lead armies. It's not just rare, it's cinematic, and that's why she stuck. That's why she got the sculptures and the speeches. But with every statue raised to her, there were women whose memories grew dimmer, like ringing a bell so loud it drowns out every smaller chime. You pause at a crossroads, unsure which path these forgotten warriors took, and that's part of the tragedy. Historians still argue whether these women were truly organized fighters or simply anomalies, blips on the edge of chaos. Some say they were mostly myth, others swear by recovered letters, trial documents, scribbled notes in monkish Latin that speak of a woman in full armor, riding north, helmet low. But we'll never know all their names. Maybe we were never meant to. The rules back then were, well, not exactly welcoming. Women were supposed to obey, kneel, pray, bleed out during childbirth, and maybe become saints posthumously if they didn't talk back too much. Picking up a sword, that was madness. That was heresy. That was a reason to be locked in a convent or worse, and yet some did it anyway. You wonder what it took. Not just the strength, but the rage, the bone-deep fury that says, no, I'm not just tending the wounded, I'm making new ones. And they didn't always do it alone. Sometimes they followed Jeanne, true, but sometimes they came before, like the story of a peasant girl from Picardy 2 decades earlier who posed as a boy to join a local militia. Her disguise wasn't for stealth, it was for survival. The moment they found out, they hanged her in her armor, boots still muddy from last night's raid. Her name isn't even footnoted in most chronicles, but someone carved a cross into the barn where she was caught. It's still there, a scar on the wood, a whisper across centuries. There's something frustratingly beautiful about these women, the way they flicker in and out of history like candle flames in a drafty chapel. You want to reach out and hold on to one. Just one. But the records are slippery, often second-hand, laced with the biases of monks who didn't quite know what to make of women with blood under their fingernails. Some labeled them witches, others temptresses. A few were simply called unnatural, as if courage had a gender. You move through ruins now, castle walls with ivy creeping through arrow slits, the kind of place where one of Jeanne's sisters might have once stood, sword in hand, hair hacked short, glaring down at a siege she refused to lose. Maybe you see her ghost, or maybe it's just the wind playing tricks again. So many of these women didn't fight to be remembered. They fought because something inside them wouldn't sit still, because their homes were burning, because their sons were taken, because their gods, or their ghosts, demanded it. And when the wars ended, the ink dried and the songs were written, they were missing from the chorus. The men who documented the battles left them out, not always out of malice, but out of habit. History, after all, has a terrible memory when it comes to women with calloused hands and dirty boots. As you drift further into this forgotten forest of names, you start to sense them, not as heroines or martyrs, just as people, angry, brave, exhausted, women who didn't ask to be legends but became phantoms instead. Phantoms you're about to follow into candlelit cloisters and blood-stained courtyards. You walk slowly now, down a stone hallway that smells of beeswax and iron. Candle flames sputter in their holders, throwing shadows across the arched ceiling. It's a convent, or at least it was once. But tonight, it feels like something stranger. You hear the quiet scrape of metal against stone, again and again. Not the sound of prayer, not chanting, not weeping. This is sharpening, a rhythm. Blades being readied. You turn a corner and see them. Women in dark robes, heads bowed, hands steady. One of them runs a whetstone along the edge of a long sword that's older than she is. Another binds her wrists with cloth strips, testing the way her fingers close into fists. These aren't nuns waiting for mass. These are soldiers preparing for battle. The idea of battle nuns sounds ridiculous until it doesn't, but they existed. The most famous were the Order of the Glorious St. Mary, formed in the early 13th century in Italy. They were officially sanctioned, briefly, and trained in arms to protect hospitals, pilgrims, and women under threat. Imagine that, a religious order that thought compassion and combat could walk hand in hand. Of course, the church wasn't thrilled. Within a few years, the order was shut down, their weapons taken, their records sealed. But not before a few of them were seen riding into border skirmishes in full armor, veils tucked beneath helmets. You sit at the edge of a broken pew and watch as one of the women draws a dagger across her palm, letting a single drop fall onto the stone floor. Not out of violence, but oath. She whispers something you don't catch. It could be a prayer, or it could be her sister's name. This is the part of boring history that rarely makes it into textbooks. These women lived at the intersection of obedience and rebellion. They used their vows like cloaks, their silence as cover. Some convents, especially in war-torn regions like the Rhineland or Catalonia, became strange safe havens for female fighters. Refugees with swords, widows with grudges, even former noblewomen who traded titles for knives. One particularly strange account comes from a Flemish monk who visited a monastery near Ghent in the early 1400s. He wrote of women of God who trained with clubs in the cloister courtyard and who repelled bandits with a fury not unlike wolves. It sounds embellished, or maybe just uncomfortable truth smoothed over by time. Historians still argue whether he was exaggerating or merely reporting a rare but real phenomenon. One thing is certain, those women vanished from the records soon after. You reach for a candlestick to steady yourself, and it's warm from someone else's hand. These women, though cloaked in obscurity, left fingerprints everywhere. Not grand monuments, but scratches in the floor where their boots dug in, initials carved under rafters, embroidery with oddly militant symbols hidden in altar cloths, a secret history woven beneath the official one. The line between warrior and witch was razor thin. One wrong move and a woman with a sword became a heretic, or worse, a warning. But still they existed. Like Marie de la Roche, a rumoured French noblewoman who disguised her identity to fight under a pseudonym. Some believe she fought at Patay beside Jeanne herself, though records list only Mark the Young, a name suspiciously genderless for the period. When she was wounded, her true identity was revealed, and she was quietly sent to a convent. She never spoke to another soldier again. You walk outside now, past cloister walls and into an overgrown garden where roses bloom in knots around rusted armor. There's a stillness here, but not the peaceful kind. More like the silence before a charge. These women weren't trying to become saints, they were trying to survive and sometimes to avenge. In Spain, during the Reconquista, there are tales of women who took up arms when the men of their villages were conscripted or killed. One woman, called Inez the Thorn, reportedly led a resistance cell through Aragon, striking at night and vanishing before dawn. She wore a habit to blend in with traveling nuns, but carried a crossbow beneath it. Her name appears in a single line of a tax record marked Enemy of the Crown. That's it. That's all that's left. You sit now in a chapel with broken, stained glass. Moonlight spills through the colored gaps and dances across the floor in red, blue, and gold. One window is still intact, a saint with a sword. It's supposed to be Michael, but someone, long ago, carved a faint line across the cheek, made it look like a woman, a tiny act of rebellion in glass. History for sleep shouldn't make you angry, but sometimes it does. Not loud, boiling anger, just a quiet, smoldering ache. These women weren't just forgotten. They were sometimes erased on purpose, too complicated, too dangerous, too unsaintly. It's easier to tell the story of one clean heroine with visions and a tragic end than to explain a dozen muddy-footed women who fought without permission. You think about that word again, permission. How much of medieval history and how much of any history is shaped by who gets to give it and who dares to take it without asking. The weirdest detail you find tonight is a page from a convent ledger in Normandy. In the margin, next to a list of candle purchases, someone scribbled a note in Latin, loosely translated, "Anna took the sword again. God forgive us." No last name, no explanation, just that, a flare in the dark. And yet, they weren't all pious. Some of these women used faith as a shield, yes, but others used it as camouflage. The line between belief and strategy blurred often. For every nun who prayed before battle, there may have been one who simply needed a roof and took the vows, with fingers crossed behind her back. The truth is, we'll never really know. These stories are stitched together from scraps, contradictions, and gut feelings. But as you leave the cloister, you glance back. The candlelight is still flickering and the blades are still being sharpened. You sense the presence of those women, not as martyrs, but as living ghosts. They are waiting to be remembered, not with pity, but with recognition. As warriors, as sisters, as sparks from the same flame that lit Jeanne's path, even if it was never allowed to burn as bright. You're on horseback now. The saddle creaks under you as the road winds upward, away from fields and forests and into a haze of wood smoke and war drums. The castle ahead is smudged with soot, its towers half collapsed, its banners hanging in tatters like old linen left too long in the rain. You don't ride with an army, you ride with her. A woman, cloaked in gold-trimmed mail, helmet under one arm, eyes locked on the fire rising behind the battlements. She doesn't slow down, doesn't hesitate. Her horse is already foaming at the mouth, hooves bleeding from the ride, but she digs in her heels again. You try to call out to warn her, but the wind carries your voice sideways. This is Jeanne's sister in spirit, but with a crown instead of a cross. Her name was Isabella of Lorraine, and she wasn't a legend. She was real. A duchess, a mother, and a commander. You don't hear about her much in boring history, probably because she doesn't fit the mold. No visions, no martyrdom, just a powerful woman who ruled, strategized, and rode into fire when her city needed her. You follow her into the chaos. Arrows fly, men scream. The stink of fear mixes with the salt of blood and sweat. You duck as something sharp whistles past your head. Isabella is already halfway up the stairs to the gatehouse, sword in hand, shouting orders to men twice her size. She isn't just inspiring the troops, she's outranking them. And here's where the story gets tricky. Historians still argue how much Isabella actually led. Was she simply a figurehead propped up by male advisors? Was she a battlefield leader in her own right? Some sources describe her as politically astute, which is polite code for probably doing a lot more than we're comfortable admitting. Others say she personally raised the funds and troops that kept Lorraine from collapsing under Burgundian pressure. Either way, she wasn't in the back room weaving banners, she was the one raising them. Isabella's story stands out because she wasn't hiding. She didn't need to disguise herself or sneak into battle dressed as a man. Her power was recognized, officially, grudgingly, and sometimes with resentment. That alone made her dangerous. You rest now in the shadow of a ruined tower where the stone still holds heat from the fires. Isabella once stood here too, cloak thrown over her shoulders, staring down messengers who told her to surrender. She didn't. When Jeanne was captured, Isabella fought to ransom her, sold jewels, emptied coffers, sent letter after letter. None of it worked, of course, but she tried harder than any king did. You sip water from a dented canteen. Everything tastes of ash. The Middle Ages weren't kind to women in power, but they made some of the fiercest ones in history, and sometimes the weirder ones too. Let's talk about Margaretha van der Meer, a Dutch noblewoman who once stormed her own cousin's castle after he tried to annul her inheritance. She brought a mob of farmers with pitchforks, wore a stolen breastplate, and reportedly shouted insults so crude that one monk fainted just hearing them. She later became a nun, because why not? There's a strange pattern you begin to notice. Many of these women, the loud ones, the brave ones, the inconvenient ones, ended up in convents. Not by choice, but as a kind of containment strategy, like sealing a volcano and hoping it forgets how to erupt. You wander deeper into the fortress ruins. A tapestry lies torn across the floor, its pattern half burned. You think you see a woman embroidered in the design, holding a banner above a field of flames. Maybe it's meant to be Jeanne. Maybe it was Isabella. Or maybe the seamstress just stitched herself into history the only way she could. The image fades as the wind shifts, and suddenly you're outside again, where the stables once stood. A young woman tends to a wounded horse, whispering in Flemish. She's got blood on her cheek and straw in her hair. She notices you, nods once, and keeps working. No dramatics, no poetry, just grit. That might be the most honest image you've seen all night. One open debate among scholars is whether women like Isabella had true autonomy or were just the best at playing within the rules they were given. It's hard to say. What's clear is that they navigated a minefield. A single misstep, a wrong word, a lost battle, even just too much success, and they risked being branded witches, usurpers, or worse. Even language betrayed them. A man who led armies was called a warrior. A woman who did the same was called unnatural. And yet they led anyway. You lean against the old stone wall and try to picture it. A duchess on horseback, leading charges, drafting treaties, organizing rations, and then rocking her youngest child to sleep the same night. History rarely allows room for that kind of duality, but that's what makes it real. That's what makes it human. And then there's Yolande of Aragon, Isabella's mother-in-law and arguably the puppet master behind Jeanne's early rise. Some say Yolande was the one who believed in Jeanne first, that she arranged the meeting, sent her the armor, and pulled the strings behind the curtain. If true, that means the most famous woman in French medieval history was sponsored by an even more powerful one we barely mention. You feel the weight of that as you step across scorched flagstones. The idea that behind every celebrated figure, there's a hidden scaffolding of forgotten brilliance. Jeanne wasn't alone. She was never alone. She was part of a lineage, a thread. And you're holding that thread now, tracing it from battlefield to throne room, from stable yard to convent, from scream to silence. Remember that convent ledger from section 2? The one where someone wrote, "Anna took the sword again"? Maybe Anna wasn't alone. Maybe she was answering a call that started long before Jeanne ever heard a saint's voice. Maybe these women weren't just rebels. Maybe they were inheritors. You brush dust from a broken shield leaning in the corner. It's cracked, the crest worn away, but the shape is unmistakably feminine, curved to fit a smaller frame. History didn't forget these women because they were weak. It forgot them because they were inconvenient, powerful in the wrong way, brave at the wrong time. But not for you. You see them now, you follow them. Their breath still lingers in the corridors. Their footprints never really faded. You're on the move again, this time cloaked in dusk and riding fast, deeper into the wilderness where battlefields give way to outlaw roads. The forest presses close, thick with pine and secrets. You're not alone. Someone rides just ahead of you, glancing back now and then, making sure you're keeping up but saying nothing. The figure is small, almost boyish, but moves with the kind of assurance that tells you they've done this before. And when they finally stop beneath a moonlit ridge and lift the visor of their helmet, you understand why no one ever questioned them. Her name is Raynette, or at least that's what you hear whispered in the dark. Most records don't mention her at all. A few scraps in Burgundian war accounts refer to Reynard the Black, a fierce soldier who served in a mixed mercenary company around the Meuse River. But there's one letter, just one, written by a scribe who swore that Reynard, when wounded and unconscious, was unmasked by a monk and revealed to be a woman. He was excommunicated for heresy. She disappeared. You sit beside her now as she tends a twisted ankle and tightens the leather wraps around her chest. She's used to moving like this, like a shadow between expectations. She never meant to be a hero. She wanted vengeance. She wanted coin. She wanted the freedom to wield a weapon and sleep where she pleased. So she cut her hair, lowered her voice, and signed up like any other angry peasant with a grudge and a blade. This isn't rare, it's just rarely admitted. Stories of women disguising themselves as men to join armies go back centuries. But boring history prefers to romanticize them or strip them of agency, like they were just trying to follow their sweethearts into battle or prove their chastity. The truth was usually colder, sharper. For some, it was the only way to eat. For others, the only way to kill the right person. You pull your cloak tighter and glance around. No one speaks here without caution. The company Raynette rides with doesn't ask questions. They've seen too much, and they know better. One of them, a grizzled archer with a broken nose, claims he saw Raynette take out 3 men in one clash, using only a short sword and a length of chain. He doesn't say it with admiration, more like fear. There's something unsettling about her. Not because she's violent, but because she doesn't care what she's supposed to be. She doesn't long for home. She doesn't pray before sleep. She doesn't soften her voice when she speaks to the wounded. You watch her laugh, rough and loud, when someone burns the stew. Then, without hesitation, she stabs a rat with a dagger and tosses it out of camp like it means nothing. Maybe it doesn't. Raynette represents a kind of middle finger to the entire medieval system. She didn't fight as a symbol or a martyr or a noblewoman in disguise. She fought as a soldier. Full stop. And that's why her story never made it into the court poems or the saintly chronicles. It was too messy, too human, too hard to twist into a lesson. But not all disguises were physical. Some women fought behind masks of nobility, diplomacy, or faith. They didn't need to strap down their chests or adopt new names. They simply moved the pieces without ever stepping on the board. One such figure, Lady Genevieve of Swabia, was known to broker military alliances through coded letters that traveled faster than any army. She once arranged the assassination of a bandit baron using only 3 couriers and a forged confession. She never lifted a blade, but she sent hundreds to their deaths from behind silk curtains. You crouch near the fire as one of Raynette's companions, a woman named Ellis, quietly removes her boots and reveals toes blackened with frostbite. She doesn't flinch. just wraps them tighter. She's been riding for weeks. No bath, no soft bed, no storybook ending. The fringe detail that sticks with you tonight is a note from a Flemish coroner's register listing the corpse of a young man who died in a brawl outside Bruges. When the body was undressed for burial, they discovered a woman's body beneath the torn doublet. No name was ever written, just a comment. Buried under protest. There's something haunting about that. The idea of dying as someone else, and no one ever knowing who you really were, or worse, someone knowing and refusing to care. Historians still debate how many women rode under false identities. Some believe there were hundreds during the 100 Years' War alone. Others say it's wishful thinking, feminist projection onto a brutal time. But the evidence, fragmentary as it is, builds a pattern. And patterns don't lie. You lean back and remember the battlefield from Section 3, the one where Isabella charged through smoke and ruin. Renette wasn't there. She never met Isabella, never saw Jeanne. But she rode the same roads. She bled into the same earth. And in her own way, she kept the lineage alive. Not the one in royal courts, but the one in muddy boots and cracked knuckles. The moon is high now, camp is quiet. Renette stares into the fire, not praying, not speaking, just listening to the crackle. She knows this can't last. Someone will figure her out eventually. Maybe it'll be a jealous comrade. Maybe a priest. Maybe a blade that cuts too deep. But for now, she survives, and for her, that's enough. You lie down beside a mossy log, the ground hard beneath you, but not unfamiliar. The stars above flicker behind clouds, and you wonder how many other women are out there, moving quietly between the cracks of history, their names swallowed by wind. You may not remember every detail of Renette's story when you wake, but you'll remember the feeling of riding beside her, the silence of the forest, the weight of secrets too dangerous to be spoken aloud. And that is something history can't take away. The silence feels heavier now. You step into a hall that once held judgment, though its doors have long since rotted and the roof beams sag like tired shoulders. The cold in here is different, not the clean chill of the wind outside, but something old and suffocating. A courtroom, or what's left of it. You can almost hear the voices still echoing off the stone walls. But they're not shouting, they're reading sentences. This is where the story turns. Where the women you've been following aren't just riding into battle or defying tradition. This is where they're caught, exposed, condemned. You walk the length of the chamber and imagine what it felt like to stand here, alone, accused of being something no woman was supposed to be. Not a soldier, not a spy, but a disruption, a threat to order, heresy, witchcraft, treason. The charges were slippery, stretched to fit whatever story was needed, and once you were labeled, there was no unlabeling. Ask Jeanne. You sit at the edge of the dais, where the judge would have sat. The floor creaks beneath your weight, even though it's stone. A trick of your nerves, maybe, or maybe this place really does remember. Dark's trial is the most famous. Not because it was unique, but because it was recorded in excruciating detail. 70 sessions, 42 assessors, dozens of questions about her visions, her clothing, her refusal to obey male authority. They weren't trying to find the truth. They were trying to wear her down, to bend her until she broke. And even then, when she did sign a confession, she recanted a few days later. She was burned anyway. But she wasn't the only one. Take Catherine de la Rochelle, a lesser-known visionary who claimed to see saints and demons in the same era as Jeanne. Unlike Jeanne, Catherine was dismissed as mad and imprisoned in silence. No trial, no burning, just obscurity. Or consider the case of Alex Leclerc, who led a small militia of peasants in a local revolt. She didn't claim divine voices or holy missions. She simply hated the tax collectors who ravaged her village. She was hanged in secret. No last words recorded. You step through a narrow arch into a dim antechamber where condemned women were once held. The walls are close together, like the space was meant to shrink them down to size before the end. Scratched into the stone are names, half erased by time. Agnès, Colombe, SF, just initials, the last thing they had. You run your fingers across the grooves. These women weren't symbols when they were alive. They were messy, terrified, defiant. They wept, they cursed, they doubted, but they didn't beg. The weirdest detail you find here is carved deeper than the rest. A small phrase in Old French that translates roughly to, "I was not alone." That part sticks. You think about Reynette again, and Isabella, and the battle nuns, about the woman with the scar on her face from the tapestry in section 3. You think about the ledger note, the cross carved into a barn wall, the blood oath whispered in the cloister. These women existed. They fought. They were punished. But they were not alone. One of the more controversial debates among modern scholars is whether these trials were driven by fear of rebellion or fear of women themselves. Some argue it was both, that the line between a heretic and a woman with opinions was paper thin, especially if she happened to hold a sword. Others say we read too much into it, that these women were rare, isolated, exceptions to the norm. But the records suggest otherwise. The sheer number of accusations, confessions and burnings suggests a pattern. And patterns, once again, don't lie. You move now through a courtyard, broken statues littering the grass like fallen chess pieces. One looks like Jeanne, or maybe it's someone else who wore the same armor. The nose is chipped off. The hands are missing. You don't need them to recognize who she was. Execution wasn't always fire. Sometimes it was exile. A woman named Beatrice of Anjou was forced to take a vow of silence and sent to a mountain monastery for the rest of her life. Her crime, writing political poems under a male pseudonym. One of those poems was found centuries later, used as insulation in a wall. You sit on the cracked stone bench where someone might have waited for their final verdict. You imagine the stillness, the knowledge that your story would never be told correctly, that even if someone remembered your name, they'd change it, soften it, or worse, use it as a warning to others. And still they spoke. Still they fought. You glance upward and see a rook circling overhead, a lone black dot against the grey sky. You wonder if it saw anything, if it remembers more than we do. What's most haunting about this place isn't the silence, but the effort it took to create it. The trials weren't just about punishing women. They were about erasing the idea that women could fight, could lead, could exist outside the roles assigned to them. And yet the idea never quite vanished. It smoldered in ashes, hid in songs, slipped between pages of forgotten books. As you leave the courtroom ruins, the wind picks up. You hear whispers again. Not ghosts, not saints, just memory. They were punished like witches, but died like heroes. And in the end, that's what history couldn't contain. You find yourself walking through a field now. The grass is tall, brushed gold by late summer sun, though it bends in strange directions, as if shaped by invisible footsteps long gone. A crumbling stone wall follows the edge of the land, broken only by the occasional iron cross, rusted and bent. This is where the quietest stories live. Not in battle cries or courtroom records, but in the earth, in letters half burned, in names lost beneath centuries of moss. You kneel beside one of the stones. It's unmarked, but someone has placed wildflowers beside it recently. That's what strikes you, not the grave, but the act of remembering. Someone still cares. Even if the name is gone, the weight remains. This is where the last of Jeanne's sisters lie. The ones who never got a line in a chronicle, the ones whose stories slipped through every crack. A girl who disguised herself and joined a garrison for a month before disappearing. A healer accused of cursing a nobleman after her son was conscripted. A woman who guarded a city gate alone while the men drank themselves senseless in a cellar. None of their stories survived intact, only fragments. You reach into the pouch at your side and unfold a letter. The parchment is fragile, edges singed. It's written in a shaky hand, signed only with an initial, E. It reads, "If I die, remember I was not afraid, and tell them I was not the only one." That line loops in your head as you walk. It echoes against the others you've collected. The whispered oath in the cloister, the scratched phrase in the jail cell, the nameless corpse buried under protest. Each one a thread, pulled from the same forgotten tapestry. You pass a pile of stones where a monastery once stood. Beneath it, according to one traveller's journal from the 16th century, was a sealed chamber filled with letters. Most were written by women, confessions, testimonies, poems, curses. The journal describes one letter in particular that began, "I saw her ride through the village. She wore no crest, but the people bowed anyway." Historians still argue whether the chamber ever existed or if the journal was just a traveller's fantasy. But you like to believe it was real, not because you need it to be true, but because it feels true. You pause beside a tree whose bark has been carved again and again. Symbols, initials. Maybe it was a meeting place, maybe a hiding spot, maybe nothing at all. Still, you run your fingers over the lines and wonder who stood here before you, knife in hand, deciding which part of herself to leave behind. The most curious detail comes in the form of a worn, stained glove found in a monastery attic in the Pyrenees. Inside, tucked into the seam, was a note that simply read, "She rode east." No date, no name, just a direction. As if someone believed or hoped that the story continued somewhere else. That's the part of boring history we forget to tell. Not just what happened, but what might have. The maybes, the missing pages, the silences we pretend aren't meaningful. You stand now at the edge of a valley. The sun is lower, shadows stretching like hands across the fields. This is where the trail ends, or maybe it loops back, depending on how you read it. Because even now, scholars still debate whether these women were anomalies or part of a larger hidden pattern, whether their stories were erased intentionally or simply swallowed by the passage of time, whether they fought for glory, revenge, survival, or something quieter, the right to simply be. You think about Jeanne again, how her story was written and rewritten, polished until it gleamed, but maybe the truth is less radiant and more raw. Maybe her greatest act wasn't the battle she won, but the spark she lit in others. Women like Isabella, Raynette, and dozens of others who didn't have banners, just reasons. The ground beneath your boots is soft now, earth over old graves. The final resting place for stories no one recorded. But that doesn't mean they're gone. You've seen them in torchlight and broken glass, in letters and shadows, in wounds and warnings. These were Jeanne's sisters, forgotten, yes, but not silent, and now, not entirely lost. The chickens are drunk again, the beer is already souring, and someone probably stole your ladle. You shuffle out of bed to the scent of damp straw, ashes, and regret. This is boring history for sleep, but not the kind that bores you. It's the kind that wraps around your brain like the smell of old ale, the kind you can't shake off even when you try. You probably won't survive this with your clean reputation intact. You rub your eyes and step over the dog, who of course has taken your only dry cloak. The fire's down to glowing embers, and the coals look like angry eyes in the ash. You poke at them with the iron rod, muttering under your breath, and dump a few twigs in. If you're lucky, it catches. If you're unlucky, you're about to burn your fingers. There's a smell coming from behind the barrels. Not a good smell. Maybe someone slept there last night. Maybe they died there. You don't check. The first task of the day is brewing ale, because even children drink it. Water from the village well tastes like it's been filtered through a dead goat. You light the small cauldron under the mash pot, the grains already soaked overnight in tepid rainwater. You stir with a wooden paddle as steam starts to rise, thick and sweet and slightly sour. This is your version of a morning espresso. In medieval times, beer wasn't just a treat, it was survival. Known as small ale, it had low alcohol, just enough to kill off waterborne diseases, but not enough to put a monk on the floor. Brewing was your livelihood, your status, your one steady thing, unless someone in the village starts spreading rumors that your barley's cursed. Your wife is already up, kneading yesterday's flour into something bread-adjacent. She mutters about rats stealing salt again. The floor creaks above. One of the travellers has woken up. Probably the cooper who kept asking if you serve eel pie. You don't. You never did. That was your cousin's inn. He died from an infected spoon wound. As the sun barely climbs over the tree line, the front door swings open. It's not locked, of course. Locks are for cathedrals and kings. A boy from the market runs in, snot down to his chin, yelling something about a pig stuck in a fence and needing vinegar. You hand him a jar. You don't ask. You've learned better. Breakfast is just last night's stew with more water. You ladle it into bowls that haven't been scrubbed since last Sunday and offer crusty bread that could be used as a weapon. The locals eat it anyway, dipping it into the mush and arguing about whether it'll rain by noon. You tell them it always rains by noon because it does. A scholarly debate breaks out over whether the new priest is actually ordained or just wearing his dead uncle's robes. You say nothing, but make a mental note not to let him bless anything in your inn. People in your time don't exactly trust each other, which is fair. Coins are clipped, weights are rigged, and the last time you bought apples, 3 were wax and 1 had a worm that bit back. You check the ale again. It's bubbling. Not too much. Just enough to tell you it's alive but not angry. You wipe your hands on your tunic and open the shutters wide. Sunlight reveals the courtyard and your one-eyed rooster, who's currently fighting his reflection in a bucket of rainwater. You admire his spirit. He'll be stew by Sunday, but until then, he's your most reliable entertainer. Beneath your inn's dusty beams, life hums. Gossip is the town's favorite currency, and your ears are always full. Who's cheating? Who's pregnant? Who's both? You stir the pot while pretending not to listen. Everyone assumes innkeepers are neutral. That's cute. The inn's layout is simple. Common room with trestle tables, a few cubby beds in the back, a loft overhead where people cough in their sleep and occasionally fall through the floorboards. You've nailed it down twice. It doesn't help. And then there's the cellar, which you avoid unless something's missing or something's scratching. Historians still debate whether cellars were used for proper storage or just as glorified panic rooms. Yours is both. Mid-morning, your youngest daughter brings in a basket of herbs from the backyard. She's the only one in the village who can identify what's edible, what's poisonous, and what just tastes like feet. She hands you yarrow and tells you someone's coming who will need it. You don't ask how she knows. She just does. And somewhere between stirring mash and wiping tables sticky with spilled mead, you remember that today is tax day. The reeve will arrive with his ledgers, his bad teeth, and his worse breath. You consider pretending the flu, or dying. But instead, you take one more gulp of the warm ale, square your shoulders, and prepare to explain why your pig count is mysteriously lower than last season. A monk in the corner finishes his morning prayer and belches so loud it rattles a spoon on the shelf. You nod respectfully. That's how blessings work in your inn. Outside, a travelling merchant sets up near your door, spreading out ribbons, pins, and one suspiciously modern-looking comb. You make a note to question him later, or maybe buy the comb. Life as a medieval innkeeper doesn't pause. It stumbles forward on aching feet and boiling barley, and just when the morning rush dies down, the next chaos begins. By midday, the inn smells like sweat, fire smoke, and boiled cabbage. You're already regretting not charging double for the stew, especially now that it's mostly water and lies. The table closest to the hearth groans under the weight of elbows and half-truths. Every guest has a story, and none of them match. This is the time of day when gossip ferments faster than ale, and everyone suddenly becomes an expert on things they barely understand. You ladle more of the mystery stew into bowls, watching as a tired-looking merchant squints at his portion like it might bite back. It might. You didn't ask too many questions when your wife handed you the leftover meat this morning. And frankly, you don't plan to now. The merchant eats anyway. Hunger is a powerful thing. He claims to have come from the coast, but his boots are dry and clean, too clean. He says he was robbed outside of town. Of course he was. Everyone is always just robbed, or on their way to being robbed. You've heard it all. This is your second job, really. Not just pouring drinks or feeding travelers, but sorting liars from troublemakers. Seated across from him is a knight, or at least a man who says he's a knight. His sword is real enough, but his hands are too smooth, and he flinches every time someone raises a voice. His coin, however, is good, heavy, unclipped. You took it quickly and didn't ask about the bloodstain on the hilt of his dagger. You refill their mugs with lukewarm ale, the midday batch not nearly as good as the morning one. The boil was rushed. You had to chase the dog out of the malt again. Still, they drink it without complaint. Your inn is not the kind of place you come to for flavor. You come for warmth, anonymity, and a roof that mostly doesn't leak. A local woman sits alone in the corner, headscarf pulled low, eyes sharp. She used to be a midwife until someone accused her of hexing a stillbirth. Now she sells herbs to passing strangers and refuses to speak to clergy. Her drink is untouched. She just watches. The stew starts bubbling too aggressively. You run over and lift the pot, only to realize someone tossed in what looks like a shoe, or part of one. You fish it out, casually drop it behind the hearth, and ladle more bowls for the next table. The man eating it doesn't notice. You consider charging him extra for the surprise. At this hour, your inn becomes the village courtroom. Everyone has a complaint, a broken fence, a goat gone missing, a neighbor who sings off-key during prayers. You nod through all of it, while secretly counting how many logs are left by the fire. Not many. You'll have to send one of the boys out before dusk. You've barely sat down when a peddler bursts in with a sack full of trinkets and a grin too wide for someone with that many missing teeth. He offers you a silver ring that smells like fish and a jug of wine he swears is from France. You ask him which part. He says the wet part. You laugh. You take the wine. Lunch at the inn is rarely peaceful. Two farmers start arguing over whose ox is stronger. You try to ignore it until one of them knocks over a stool. You slam your ladle on the table. Everyone freezes. You've only done that twice before, and the second time someone left on a stretcher. The argument dies immediately. Historical records tell us that medieval inns were hubs of social exchange, places where news traveled faster than any official decree. But they also remind us that violence was never far. A misplaced word could end with a knife in the ribs. And sometimes that knife came from someone sitting right next to you, still chewing stew. Near the hearth, a girl begins to sing. Her voice is clear, high, and entirely inappropriate for the content of the song. You let her finish, then tell her she's banned from ballads until supper. She sticks her tongue out and scurries off. You sweep the floor with a bundle of twigs tied together. Dust, breadcrumbs, and what might have once been cheese scatter in every direction. A rat scurries across the floorboards like it's late for a meeting. You wonder, not for the first time, if it pays rent. Outside, the clouds thicken. You can smell rain in the air, mingled with the distant scent of manure. You bolt the window shutters just in case. Wind likes to sneak in and rearrange the drying herbs hanging from the rafters. You pass the hearth again and notice something odd. One of the merchant's coins is gone from the table, replaced with a dull stone. He hasn't noticed. You glance toward the corner, where the ex-midwife now pretends to be deeply invested in a splinter on the bench. You say nothing. Historians still debate whether most innkeepers in medieval Europe were truly neutral in village drama, or whether they subtly shaped outcomes by which stories they repeated, and to whom. You know the answer. Of course you shape things. That's your real job. You pull out a hidden bottle from behind the bread bin, the good stuff. You pour yourself a sip and settle near the window. For a moment, it's almost calm. Just the crackle of fire, the clink of spoons, the hum of tired voices. You close your eyes and enjoy it. Then someone asks if you're serving venison tonight. You open your eyes and smile politely, even though inside you're screaming. Of course you're not serving venison. This is not a noble's manor, and deer don't walk into your kitchen and ask to be cooked. Still you nod and say you'll check the pantry. That's innkeeper speak for no, but I don't want to argue. By the time the stew pot is empty and the ale has gone flat, the crowd thins. A few locals linger, slowly sipping the last of their drinks. You start collecting bowls, scraping crusty remains into the dog's dish. He doesn't look happy about it, but he eats. The knight and the merchant are still at their table, now playing a dice game you suspect is rigged. You let them have their moment. Soon, night will fall, and everything will change again. Night creeps in without ceremony, just a gradual dimming of the world until everything inside your inn feels too close, too warm, too full of breath. You light the lanterns, 3 of them, though one always flickers, no matter how often you trim the wick. Shadows stretch across the walls like tired guests searching for a place to lie down. And lie down they do, on benches under tables beside the hearth. You've rented out every possible surface. There's no such thing as privacy here, just corners and a thin blanket if you're lucky. You watch as a merchant curls up beside a barrel and uses his cloak as a pillow. The knight, now shirtless and snoring, has taken the loft despite your warning about the missing railing. If he falls, that's tomorrow's problem. You shake out the straw on the main room floor, spreading it unevenly into sleeping piles. You've given up trying to make it fair. The first one to drop their boots gets the fluffiest patch. By now, you've seen every kind of sleeper. The ones who twitch, the ones who talk, the ones who wake screaming. You don't ask questions anymore. In medieval inns, bedding was communal. Personal space didn't exist, and neither did hygiene, at least not the way we understand it. Lice were as common as spoons, and sometimes friendlier. You feel a tickle on your neck and swat it without flinching. Probably just the air. Probably. Someone's already complaining about the straw. Says it smells like mold. It does, but fresh straw costs silver and effort, and right now you're low on both. You offer the complainer a smile and a bowl of something resembling porridge. He accepts the trade. You do a quick count. 22 guests, 2 dogs, 1 cat, possibly feral, definitely not yours, and 1 widow who insists on sleeping near the door so she can leave if she sees her dead husband's ghost. You let her. It's not the strangest request you've had. You head into the storage room for more blankets and nearly trip over the cooper's apprentice, who has made a nest out of old sacks. He grins and shows you a beetle the size of a coin. You nod solemnly and tell him not to eat it. He looks disappointed. Historically, many inns kept livestock inside at night, chickens under tables, pigs in corners. Yours are mostly outdoors now, except for the goat, who has learned how to open the back door with her head. You don't even try to stop her anymore. Tonight, she settles near the fire like she owns the place. Your wife starts locking up, which just means leaning a broom against the front door and muttering a quick prayer. Real locks are for rich people and paranoid bishops. You trust the knight to keep most threats out. The rest, well, you've got a frying pan and a heavy ladle. It's late now, and you're finally sitting back against the wall, sipping a cup of the dregs. It's sour and cloudy, but at least it's warm. Across the room, someone whispers a song, a lullaby maybe, or a warning. Hard to tell in this light. The candlelight dances on the low ceiling beams, flickering across carvings you didn't make and don't want to ask about. Guests sometimes leave their mark. A charm against illness, a symbol for safe return, or something darker. You think about scrubbing them off, then decide against it. Some things are better left unread. A guest in the far corner starts coughing. Not a polite cough, the kind that rattles. You watch him closely. Illness spreads like spilled ale in these walls. You mentally review the herbal stash, yarrow, comfrey, and something your daughter insists is good for the lungs, but smells like boiled cabbage and regret. You'll check on him in the morning, if he's still breathing. Then there's a scream, short, sharp, from upstairs. Everyone freezes. You're already moving. The knight is on his feet too, sword drawn even before he's fully awake. You meet him halfway up the stairs, each step groaning under your combined weight. At the top, you find the culprit, a girl, maybe 14, pointing at the rafters. She says she saw eyes, glowing ones. You inspect the area, poking through old blankets and loose boards. Nothing. You tell her it was probably a cat, or maybe a trick of the firelight. But as you glance toward the window, you think you see something too, a shape. Then it's gone. You pat her shoulder and send her back down with a cup of ale. She'll sleep better, you won't. Back downstairs, things settle again. Some guests laugh nervously. Others pretend nothing happened. The knight returns to his place in the loft, blade still close at hand. The girl curls up by the fire now, holding the cup with both hands like it might keep the shadows back. You finally sit again and rub your temples. You didn't sign up for this. But then again, no one really chooses to be an innkeeper. You inherit it, marry into it, or stumble into it after too many debts and not enough luck. And once you're in, you're in. Scholars still argue whether medieval innkeepers were respected members of their communities or barely tolerated necessary evils. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. People trust you with their secrets and their safety, but they also blame you when things go wrong. The stew is bad, your fault. A fight breaks out, your fault. Rain leaks through the roof, definitely your fault. You glance at the door, wondering if you should wedge the bar across it tonight. You don't. Something about keeping an exit open feels safer. Just as you start dozing, your elbow against the wall, you hear it. A soft chitter. Not quite a rat, not quite a bird. You open your eyes. The goat is staring at the far corner, her ears twitching. You whisper her name. She doesn't move. You rise, grab the lantern, and walk toward the corner. Nothing, just shadows and cold stone. You turn back, the goat still staring. You tell yourself it's nothing, then blow out the lantern. The room sinks into darkness, filled with the sounds of breath and sleep, and maybe something else. Sometime past midnight, the room shifts. Not physically, but in its energy. The kind of change that doesn't have a sound, only a feeling. Like when everyone suddenly stops laughing, and you don't know why. The fire is low now, just glowing coals, and a faint hiss each time a log shifts. You're barely awake, slumped in your usual spot by the wall when it starts. First there's shouting outside, then the heavy thud of a body hitting your door. You jolt upright, heart pounding in that slow medieval rhythm of dread. You wait. 1 second, 2. Then the voice again. "Open up, it's mine. That's my chicken." You groan. Not this again. You get up, unlatch the door, and there stands Grigor, the miller's cousin, wet from head to toe and holding a sack that clearly contains something alive. His beard drips. His eyes are wide. "She was in your pen. Don't tell me she wandered here. She hates your goat." You look past him. Rain slicks the mud road. A few curious heads poke out from neighboring windows. You sigh, wave him inside, and gesture to the bench. The chicken, of course, escapes the moment he sits. It takes 3 people, 1 bowl of porridge, and an old bedsheet to catch it. The girl from earlier helps. She seems less scared now, or maybe she's just bored. Once the chicken is resecured, Grigor slumps against the wall and begins muttering about curses. You hand him ale and tell him it's blessed. It isn't, but he believes you. That's half the job. As you settle everyone again, someone near the loft starts laughing, loudly, too loudly. It's the merchant from earlier, eyes glassy, cheeks flushed. He's halfway through the French wine from the peddler and clearly nearing the part of the evening where he thinks he's funny. "I once shared a bed with a bishop's niece," he declares. "No, you didn't," someone replies from the floor. "Yes, I did," he insists, then promptly vomits into his own lap. You sigh and toss him a cloth. He misses. This is what late night at the inn always becomes. Not rest, not silence, but a parade of bodily fluids, drunken boasts, and deeply unwise decisions. You start mopping slowly, rhythmically. The floor will never be clean. That's not the goal. You just need it less sticky. In the corner, someone starts crying. You glance over. A woman, face buried in her hands. You don't know her name. She came in quietly and hasn't spoken since. You walk over, offer her bread. She doesn't take it, but she nods in thanks. That's enough. You settle back again, trying to rest your eyes for a moment, but then the dog starts growling. Not barking, growling, low, focused, directed toward the staircase. You follow his gaze. The knight is awake too. He moves silently, reaching for his blade again. You stand, you wait. Then, creaking, slow, one footstep at a time, down the stairs. Everyone else is asleep, or pretending to be. You grip the broom beside you like a weapon. The knight steps forward. You hold out a hand, warning him to stay back. The figure at the top of the stairs stops, then continues. Down, down, into view. It's the cooper's apprentice, pale, eyes wide open, sleepwalking. He moves like a puppet, limbs too loose, head tilted. You approach carefully, softly, and place a hand on his shoulder. He doesn't react. You guide him back up the stairs, avoiding the broken step, and settle him back into his makeshift nest. He mumbles something about beetles with faces. You tuck him in because that's who you are now. The broom-wielding babysitter of drunkards and dreamers. Back downstairs, the tension breaks. The knight sits again. The dog returns to the hearth. You pour yourself more ale. It tastes like metal and fire. There's a sudden crack at the back door. You freeze, but it's just the goat again, kicking it open like she pays rent. She marches in, tail high, and flops next to the fire. Someone claps. Someone else groans. You glance at the hour candle. Just past third watch. Historians often debate what time people in the Middle Ages actually slept. The idea of first sleep and second sleep is well documented. People would go to bed early, wake in the middle of the night, tend to chores, pray, or even visit neighbors, and then return to sleep until dawn. Your inn lives in that in-between space, the witching hours where logic slips, stories rise, and the line between dreams and memory frays. A man near the door suddenly jumps up, shouting that his coin purse is gone. You're not surprised. It was tied loosely to his belt, practically begging to be lifted. He accuses the merchant. The merchant accuses the knight. The knight says nothing. You hold up both hands and demand silence. You check under the benches, under the bowls, under the dog. No purse. Then the goat sneezes, and out drops the missing pouch. No one dares question it. The man apologizes to the knight, who doesn't accept, but gives a curt nod. The goat is declared innocent, but untrustworthy. You finally sit again, bones aching, brain fuzzy. You wonder what it's like to sleep an entire night, start to finish, without interruption, without chickens, ghosts, or drunk merchants telling half-truths. A gust of wind rattles the shutters. You get up again, relatch them, and whisper a quick thanks to whatever keeps the roof on one more night. As you turn back, you spot the girl from earlier, now asleep near the hearth, clutching the chicken like a doll. The widow still sits by the door, watching nothing. The dog twitches in his sleep. You lean against the wall, close your eyes, and count slowly backward from 10. You get to 6 before someone coughs. You wake with your cheek pressed against the cold wall and a cramp in your left leg. Outside it's still dark, but the silence inside is brittle, the kind that feels borrowed, like someone else paid for it. You sit up slowly, trying not to disturb the dog who's now drooling on your boot. He's earned it, so have you. Everyone's asleep, or something close to it. Soft snoring, muffled groans. One person muttering in Latin, which is never a good sign. You push yourself up and step over bodies, moving toward the back table where the candles have long burned out, but the ledger still waits. You light a stub of tallow, shielding the weak flame with your hand, and open the book. The ink is smudged, the pages greasy at the corners. Your handwriting looks like it was done mid-earthquake. Still, the numbers are there, mostly. You count the coins from today's trades. One short, always one short. You think back, 3 mugs of ale, 2 stews, 1 broken bowl, a chicken tax, the mystery surcharge for whatever was in the cellar last night. Should have evened out, but it doesn't. You dig deeper into the coin pouch. One piece feels odd, too thin, too smooth. You hold it up to the light. It's been shaved. Coin clipping was a common problem in your time. A quiet theft of tiny shavings from silver coins. Enough shavings, and you could afford a new horse. Or a new life. You flick the clipped coin aside and make a note in the margins. Watch merchant. No surprise. Your daughter appears behind you like a ghost. You didn't hear her coming. She sets down a bowl of stew and says nothing. She's always quiet in the mornings. You take a bite. It's edible. Sort of. Better than the stew from 2 nights ago, which might have contained shoe leather. You offer her a smile. She just nods and walks away, slipping between sleepers like she belongs to the shadows. You return to the ledger, where the numbers mock you. You try again, still off, then you hear the whistle, faint, outside. You walk to the door, unlatch it, and step into the cool air. The sky's beginning to grey, the road is empty, but the whistle sounds again. A tune you almost recognize, but not quite. You stand still for a moment, listening, then it stops. You shut the door, latch it this time, and head to the cellar. You light a second candle and descend the steps. The air is damp, earthy. Something drips in the distance. You pass barrels of ale, sacks of flour, bundles of herbs hanging from hooks. Everything seems normal, but the far corner, the dark one, feels wrong. You move closer. You find a torn piece of cloth. It looks familiar. You pick it up, smells like smoke and sweat. Then you see the scuffed boot print beside it, smaller than yours, barely visible. You take a breath and turn back. You've got a dozen people upstairs. Some of them might be thieves, some might be worse. But right now your mind is on your daughter. The quiet way she moves, the herbs she gathers, the bruises on her arms she never explains. You start to wonder. You climb back up into the main room where the knight is now sitting upright, sipping from his flask. You exchange a nod, mutual suspicion, mutually ignored. The merchant is sprawled across the bench, snoring, his coin pouch once again suspiciously exposed. You fight the urge to lift it, just to teach him a lesson. At the far end of the room, the ex-midwife stands near the window, muttering into a bowl of water. She's dropped 3 coins into it. 1 floats. You make a mental note. Don't drink that water. You head to the storage chest, pulling out the last of the candles and your tally stones. Time to prepare for the reeve. Every few weeks the reeve shows up to take his cut. Grain, ale, coin, anything you can't hide fast enough. He'll come with questions and dirty boots, pretending not to see the missing logs or the dented cups. You hate him, but you'll smile. That's the job. You hear movement outside and step onto the stoop. A small group approaches. Not the reeve. It's your cousin, the one you thought had died in that spoon accident. He's not dead, just limping. He grins and holds up a scroll. Marriage contract, probably forged. Wants a room for the night and a hot meal. You welcome him in. Inside, someone's crying again. Not the same woman, a new one. You've lost count of how many guests you actually have now. You sit down with your cousin, split the last of the stew, and listen as he tells you about a traveling fair where someone swallowed a live eel and lived. You pretend to laugh. Then he says something strange. They're watching you, you know. The ones in the hills. You blink. What? He shrugs. You'll see, or maybe you already have. He drinks, then sleeps. You stare at him for a while, wondering if he's mad or just trying to mess with you. You check the ledger again. Still short. You add another note. Borrowed eel story. Check source. The fire crackles. A baby somewhere in the loft starts crying. You didn't even know there was a baby here. You resist the urge to scream. Instead, you pick up your broom and start sweeping again, because no one else will. There's a strange peace that settles in just before dawn. Not real silence, but a soft hum of exhaustion. The inn is quiet, in the way a battlefield might be quiet after the fighting stops. You're still upright, broom in hand, nudging crumbs and straw into something that resembles order. The embers in the hearth glow like tired eyes. A few guests stir, stretch, mumble, then roll back into sleep. This is second sleep, the forgotten cousin of the modern night. After the first rest ends and before morning begins, you get this window. The air is colder now, thick with the breath of sleeping bodies. You throw another log on the fire. It sizzles like bacon, but the smell is all smoke and wet bark. Your daughter sits by the back wall, legs tucked under her, gently combing tangles from the goat's fur. You don't ask why she's awake. You never do. She hums a tune you recognize from your own childhood, something your mother used to sing when storms rolled in. You close the ledger for good. The numbers won't change. You've done your part. Then a knock at the back door. 3 knocks, then 1, then 2 more. You freeze. That pattern is familiar. You glance at your daughter. Her eyes are already on you. She nods once. You cross the room, step over 2 guests and a chicken, and unbar the door. It creaks open to reveal a hooded figure. Short, stocky, bare feet, dirty and bleeding. He looks up at you with bright, clear eyes and says a name you haven't heard in 10 years. Yours. Your real one. You let him in without a word. He slips into the shadows beside the hearth, pulls out a folded cloth and places it gently in your hands. You unwrap it slowly. Inside is a coin. Real. Whole. Heavy. And a message scratched into a sliver of bone. It's not over. You look up, but the man is already gone. The dog growls again. You walk back to the table, sit beside your cousin, who is snoring now and smells like pickled fish, and think back. To the old stories, to the hills he mentioned, to the things people say only madmen believe. There's a room in the back of the inn, locked, forgotten. You haven't opened it in years, no key, just nails and memory. You glance toward it now. Your wife once told you not to ask what was built behind that door. You didn't, but you heard things, sometimes still do. You rise, step past the sleeping guests, each breath loud now somehow. You touch the door with your fingers and feel warmth. From the other side, you back away, return to the hearth, stir the coals, pretend none of that happened. You hand your daughter the coin. She studies it, then tucks it into her sash like it's just another stone. She doesn't ask questions, she just hums. The rooster crows, late and off-key. Someone stirs upstairs. The night snores and mutters something about wolves. You begin the morning ritual. Boil the water, measure the grain. Scrub the same old stains from the same old table. Outside, the village wakes. The reeve arrives at the gate, scowling at the puddles, holding his ink-stained book like it owes him something. You take a deep breath and smile. You've survived another night. You'll survive the day too. Maybe. The inn grows quiet again as the first full light of morning seeps through the cracks in the shutters. Outside, the village begins its slow shuffle into another day. Carts creaking, roosters crowing, boots dragging through soft mud. But inside, everything softens. The fire sighs, just a whisper now, its glow tracing gentle patterns along the stone floor. The air is thick with warmth, and the scent of boiled grain lingers in the corners like a memory too tired to leave. A bowl sits half-finished on the table. A child's foot dangles from a bench. Somewhere in the loft, someone finally stops snoring. You lean back against the wall, the same spot you always return to, and let the weight of the night slide off your shoulders. Your hands are sore. Your back aches. But you did it. Another night kept safe. Another fire tended. Another ledger filled, even if the numbers still don't make sense. Your daughter hums quietly, still sitting with the goat, who has dozed off mid-chew. The inn breathes alive in its strange, crooked way, imperfect, patched, and deeply yours. The world outside might be wide and full of questions, but in here, everything is simple. You sweep, you pour, you listen, and sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, you remember why you never left. You close your eyes for just a moment, not to sleep, but to drift, to rest in the space between footsteps and firelight, between story and silence. And as your breath slows and your thoughts blur at the edges, the room fades gently around you. Just wood and warmth and the faint echo of your daughter's song.